Ever find yourself, kind of wrestling with doubts about the Bible? Like, wondering if those stories could really be true, or if the stuff in there still matters today in our world?
It's more common than you think.
Yeah.
It really is. These are questions people have been asking for ages, and they're valid questions. Really, they are.
So we're going to dive into that. All those tough questions about the Bible.
Okay, sounds good.
We've got excerpts from Timothy Keller's book, The Reason for God,
Okay.
specifically chapter 7.
And he really gets into it. He doesn't shy away from those doubts. In fact, he introduces these two characters, Charles and Jacqueline, to kind of represent those struggles.
Oh, interesting. So, what are their struggles?
Well, Charles, he questions the historical accuracy of the Bible, right? And Jacqueline, she's more concerned with the social teachings. Like, are they really relevant today? She's not so sure.
Which, yeah, some of that stuff can feel a little outdated.
It can. And Keller gets that. He even talks about how back in college, he was taught that the Gospels were basically like whispers, passed down, changed a little each time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So how do you even counter that? That's going to be a tough one to overcome, right?
Yeah.
If you want to, trust what the Bible says.
Right. And Keller tackles it head on. He looks at the historical accuracy of the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John.
Okay.
And he challenges that whole idea that they were written so long after the events that they basically became like legends.
Right. Yeah.
Like, can we really trust them? And he's like, hold on a second. The timeline just doesn't support that.
Okay, so what does he say?
Well, he says that the timing is far too early for the Gospels to be legends.
Okay.
He actually points to Paul's letters,
Okay.
which, keep in mind, were written even earlier.
Right.
And those letters already mention all the major things about Jesus' life, his miracles, crucifixion, even the resurrection. It was already circulating.
Oh, wow. So, while people were around who could have been like, no way, that didn't happen.
Exactly. Eyewitnesses were still alive. Imagine if someone tried to rewrite history and you were right there. You'd be the first one to say, hold up.
That's so true. I was there, man. That's not how it went down.
Right. You wouldn't stay silent. And it wasn't like they were writing these things centuries later when everyone who could confirm or deny was long gone.
It's true. It's true.
It would be a lot harder to challenge. But in this case, those Gospels, people could have spoken up.
Right.
But there's more. Keller brings in this scholar, Richard Bauckham.
Okay.
And Bauckham, he found that the gospel writers, they really wanted people to know that their accounts were accurate. They even named their sources.
Oh, wow. That's ballsy. Especially if you're making stuff up.
Right. Talk about accountability. They were like, hey, don't just take our word for it. Go ask these folks.
That's pretty convincing.
And we're not talking about vague references either.
Like what?
They mention specific names. Like Alexander and Rufus, the sons of the guy who helped Jesus carry the cross.
Oh, right.
These were real people who could be identified. It'd be really hard to just make that up and get away with it.
No kidding. It's like you're really putting it all out there.
Right.
So it seems like Keller's saying these stories, they weren't just fabricated out of thin air.
Not at all.
There's some real historical weight behind them.
Exactly. It's also important to remember this wasn't happening in a vacuum. Jesus was teaching, performing miracles, all very publicly.
Right. Out in the open.
Exactly. If the stories about him were false, people would have known. They would have said something.
Totally. Hold on, I was there. That's not how it happened.
Exactly. It'd be like trying to spread a rumor about your next door neighbor. Everyone knows them. They'd see right through it.
Or claiming you saw Bigfoot in your backyard. Someone's going to call you out.
For sure.
Okay, so the timing of the Gospels, the eyewitnesses, the public nature of Jesus' life, it all points to the historical reliability of the accounts.
That's Keller's point, yeah. Okay, that makes sense. But what about what's actually written? The content itself.
Now we're getting to the good stuff.
Right.
Keller, he points out that some of what's written in the Gospels, it's actually counterproductive.
Counterproductive? What do you mean? Like if you're trying to, get people to follow Jesus?
Exactly.
Give me an example.
Okay, the crucifixion.
Okay.
Think about it. If you're trying to gain followers, why include that?
Right.
To the Romans and Greeks, crucifixion meant one thing: criminal.
Yeah.
Not divine.
It's true. It's not exactly the best look if you're trying to, promote someone as the Son of God.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or how about Jesus' moments of doubt and despair in the Garden of Gethsemane?
Right.
That doesn't exactly scream powerful, heroic figure, does it? Not really. Why include those details if you're trying to make him look good?
Exactly. And that's what's so interesting. They included those details because they were true.
It's like they were more concerned with telling the truth than making everything look perfect.
Exactly.
Makes sense. It's like they wanted to keep it real.
Right. It adds to the credibility.
Totally.
Now, we've got to talk about those other gospels that people bring up.
Oh, yeah. The Gnostic Gospels, right. Like,
Right.
some people say those tell a different story about Jesus.
Exactly. And it's a good point to bring up because people want the full picture.
Right, of course.
But here's the thing about those Gnostic Gospels. They were actually written way later than the canonical Gospels.
Oh, really?
Yeah, much later. We're talking Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Those were written much closer to the actual events.
So not as reliable then, like from a historical perspective.
Exactly. Think of it this way. You're trying to figure out something that happened 100 years ago.
Okay.
Which account are you going to trust more? One written right after it happened or one from, like, 500 years later?
The one closer to the actual event, obviously.
Right, and it's not just the timing. These Gnostic Gospels, they also reflect a different worldview, more Greek philosophy than the Jewish context that Jesus actually lived in.
So it's less about what actually happened, more about trying to make Jesus fit into their own ideas.
Exactly. Kind of like imagine a self-help book today claiming to be the lost teachings of Buddha or something.
Right. Interesting, but probably not what Buddha actually said.
Exactly. So we have to keep that in mind when we're looking at these different texts.
Okay, so we've talked about the history, the reliability of the Gospels, but what about the stuff that just seems really off to us today? You know, like the parts about slavery and the way women are treated. That's tough to swallow.
I agree. And honestly, a lot of people struggle with those parts of the Bible. I know I have. But Keller, he tells us to try and see those passages through the eyes of the people who were there.
Okay.
We have to consider the historical and cultural context.
So not saying those practices were okay,
Yeah.
but trying to understand what they meant at the time.
Right. For example, slavery back then in the Roman Empire, it wasn't the same as the brutal chattel slavery we often think of.
Oh, okay. So like different kinds of slavery.
Exactly. Roman slavery, it was often more like being an indentured servant. Like,
Yeah.
you could earn your freedom. Some slaves even lived pretty comfortably.
Wow, I never knew that.
Keller gives an example. A slave who was a skilled scribe. He could earn his freedom, even by his family's freedom, too. Very different from what we see in other times and places.
That is a huge difference. Doesn't make it right, but it's definitely a different situation.
Exactly. And that's why Keller warns us about thinking our current values are like the ultimate standard of what's right and wrong. What seems totally wrong to us now might have been totally normal back then.
Right? Yeah. Makes you think.
It does. He even compares it to those Anglo-Saxons.
Oh, one's from early England.
Yeah, like if they were reading about Peter betraying Jesus,
And we see that as this huge turning point leading to forgiveness and all. What would they think?
they'd probably be shocked. Like, how could you betray your leader? Loyalty was everything to them. They might not understand Jesus forgiving Peter at all.
Wow. It really is all about perspective, isn't it?
It really is. We can't just read the Bible through our 21st century lenses and assume we've got it all figured out.
It's like judging a fish for not being able to climb a tree. Totally different environments.
Exactly. We have to try to understand the context, the culture, the whole picture.
It's true. It's like we need to be anthropologists or something, you know?
Yeah.
Trying to understand this ancient culture and how they saw the world.
Exactly. And be humble about it,
Yeah.
right? Not just assume we know better because we live in the future. Who knows what people will think about our values 500 years from now?
Okay, yeah, that's a scary thought. But, you know, we've covered so much, the Gospels, the history, the culture, how it all fits. But where does Keller actually land on all this? Like, can we trust the Bible or what?
It's the big question, right? And I think what he's getting at is it's not so black and white. Like, yes, trust it all, or nope, throw it out.
So there's room for, like, nuance?
Definitely. He says some teachings, they need some serious interpretation. We've got to wrestle with the tough stuff. But it's the core message, especially about Jesus, that's really key.
So focus on the heart of it, the big picture.
Yeah.
Not get stuck on all those little details.
Exactly. He even compares it to a swimming pool.
Okay.
You want to dive into the deep end where those big truths are, not splash around in the shallows where you might get confused or, hit your head.
That's a good one. I like that. Start deep, then see where it goes.
Right. Don't get hung up on the little stuff before you've even dipped your toe in the real deal.
Speaking of getting hung up,
Yeah.
he talks about this Stepford God idea.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
It's like those movies, right?
Yeah.
Where the wise are basically robots programmed to be perfect.
Exactly. And he's saying sometimes we can do that with the Bible. Just pick and choose the parts that already fit what we believe and kind of ignore the rest. Like create our own version of God that doesn't challenge us too much.
So we end up with a yes man God instead of the real deal.
Exactly. Which, might feel comfy at first, but doesn't really get us anywhere. Not really.
No,
Yeah.
not in the long run.
Yeah,
Because real relationships, they make you think, push you a bit.
exactly. And maybe that's part of what the Bible's supposed to do.
So it's okay to question,
Hmm.
to not have it all figured out.
I think so. Because maybe those parts that make us uncomfortable, those are the parts that make us really grow.
It's like, don't just read the Bible, wrestle with it a
Yeah.
little.
Exactly. Engage with it.
So maybe we can't take it all literally today,
Yeah.
but we can still learn from it.
Yes. It's a conversation. And maybe it should be a little uncomfortable sometimes.
Definitely keeps things interesting. Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive. Thanks for joining us as we explore these big questions. We'd love to hear your thoughts. So find us on your favorite social media and keep the conversation going.